Medieval prison cells. The term evokes a gloomy, unsettling scene. Damp stone walls, rattling chains, and a shadowy figure in a hooded robe beside a rack. People often perceive medieval penalties as chaotic, violent acts secretly imposed on the marginalized. Yet despite its undeniable harshness, viewing it as aimless violence overlooks the chilling rationale behind the whole structure. Middle Ages penalties were seldom conducted in secrecy. It was a public spectacle, a harsh and precisely choreographed ceremony aimed at achieving far more than just inflicting pain on a criminal. At its essence, an offense transcended mere violation of an individual or their possessions. It constituted a transgression against the divine and a provocation to the power of the sovereign or monarch. This was perceived as an action that unraveled society's foundational structure and disturbed the celestial, divine equilibrium. The aim of retribution, thus, was to mend that structure, re-establish equilibrium via a potent and overt demonstration. The offender's body transformed into a communal board where the principles of justice were inscribed for universal observation. In a society where most could not read, public shaming, mark-making, or capital punishment served as lessons communicated through suffering and sacrifice. These acts left an intense, lasting impression on the collective psyche, illustrating the costs of moral failure and the inevitability of authority. Deciphering their penalties unveils the core of their existence, a realm where boundaries between wrongdoing, moral transgression, and social norms were forcibly etched. For minor offenses disrupting medieval urban harmony, drunkenness in public, falsifying weights, spreading rumors, or minor altercations escalating into brawls, the aim was to suppress defiance, not harm flesh. The standard and most impactful penalties seldom targeted physical torment, but rather staged a communal display of absolute, unembellished disgrace. Introduced the two most emblematic tools of this societal penalty, the stocks and the pillory. The stocks consisted of a basic wooden contraption that immobilized a prisoner's ankles, leaving them seated in a vulnerable position on a short bench. The pillory served as the more degrading vertical counterpart, a wooden structure on a pole featuring openings to restrain the head and arms, compelling the individual to remain standing, hunched, and visible. The accused was confined within one of these mechanisms in the most conspicuous location possible, the town square during market hours, enduring durations ranging from multiple hours to an entire day. The penalty lay not in the bodily distress, which was undeniably intense. The real penalty lay in the crowd. Exposure to public shaming meant becoming the reluctant focus of a brutal live performance. The gathering of townspeople, your neighbors, clients, the faithful, did not simply observe. They actively engaged in the proceedings. They mocked, insulted, and hurled projectiles. They would hurl the defenseless accused with a revolting assortment of objects: decayed produce, filth, livestock waste, and corpse remnants. A precisely thrown stone might transform a stint in the stocks into a perilous danger. In a close-knit historical settlement where status defined survival, this punishment was a catastrophic blow. Public disgrace signified total exclusion from societal respect. However, this public display of humiliation served an essential supplementary goal: rehabilitation. After the trial concluded and the culprit was set free, drenched in disgust and disgrace, their obligation to society was deemed fulfilled. The crowd had released its fury, the wrongdoer was crushed, and the ledger was, in principle, erased. For the pastry chef who peddled inferior goods, this public infamy served as a stronger and enduring warning than a superficial penalty. When an act was judged beyond the bounds of mere verbal retribution, the judiciary demanded a visceral price. For transgressions like high-profile theft, violence, or chronic public unrest, the penalty progressed from soul-corroding to body-embarrassing. These were not concealed acts of torment. Unlike the pillory, they served as open-air displays meant to be as enduring as they were agonizing. The most direct retribution was corporal punishment. The condemned individual was unclothed to the torso, secured to a central pillar in the town square, and subjected to a set number of lashes, 20s for minor infractions, or as many as 100 for more severe transgressions. This was a stark and violent display of aristocratic dominance, an intense expression of control that inflicted both bodily and mental wounds. However, for graver crimes, the penalty transformed into an awe-inspiring emblem, a harrowing example of retributive balance. This system enforced retributive justice through extreme physical consequences. The limb associated with theft was removed at the wrist using sharp tools. A deceitful utterance under oath or offensive speech risked branding or excision. Eavesdropping on confidential exchanges might lead to attachment to a public restraint. The objective extended beyond mere infliction of suffering. A man with a missing limb or a face marked by a brand transformed into a moving parable of moral consequence. His unchanging physical mark acted as a persistent reminder for every person he encountered, a definitive sign of criminal punishment. The same principle extended to the act of imprinting a symbol on the body. A heated metal tool, shaped into a unique character or insignia, was applied to the perpetrator's skin, commonly on the cheek, temple, or chest. The sound of burning tissue and the pungent odor of smoke became central elements of the public display. The enduring mark served as a lasting symbol of their wrongdoing. A T could identify a thief, a V, a beggar. This insignia was an unavoidable aspect of their identity, guaranteeing their misconduct would remain etched in memory wherever they traveled. Visualize a world devoid of genetic analysis, biometric scans, or credible witness accounts. In the early medieval era, when establishing culpability through human judgment was impractical, tribunals occasionally turned to a supreme arbiter, the divine. This was the rationale for the trial by ordeal, a captivating and harrowing element of medieval legal systems. An ordeal was not a form of retribution but a judicial process. It involved a body-based examination imposed on the defendant, driven by the conviction that divine forces would directly expose the truth. The whole population, alongside the local priest, would congregate for this solemn, sacred ceremony. Several prevalent types of ordeals emerged across different regions. The priests swiftly wrapped and secured their hand. 3 days passed before the bandages were taken off. If the injury showed signs of proper recovery, divine judgment affirmed their innocence. Should the wound fester and become inflamed, common in such conditions, they faced a guilty verdict. Trial by boiling water, this relied on parallel principles. The defendant was required to immerse their arm in a boiling water cauldron to fetch a stone or ring from the depths. The verdict on the injury was identical to that of the iron test. Cold water trial. Defendants typically accused of witchcraft were shackled and cast into a blessed river or pond. As water symbolized purity, it was thought to repel the corrupt. Thus, if the accused remained afloat, they were deemed guilty. If they submerged, the uncontaminated water embraced them, signifying their innocence. The catch was that the newly cleared individual had to be rescued from the water before suffocating. Modern views regard this as a brutal and illogical method. Yet medieval thinking saw it as a flawless method to invoke divine judgment. The ritual was later denounced by the Church in 1215, acknowledging it as an effort to manipulate divine will. Yet for centuries, it remained a genuine and harrowing method for determining guilt instead of a jury's verdict, relying on divine, capricious action. For the gravest offenses, such as homicide, betrayal, heresy, or severe theft, the legal system required the severest punishment. Medieval punishments were seldom direct, immediate acts of termination. It represented the pinnacle of judicial spectacle, an orchestrated ceremony where the means of demise carried layered societal and ideological significance. The manner of your end reflected your status and transgressions. Hanging remained the prevalent yet dishonorable penalty imposed. Executed on the gallows, a lasting, menacing symbol often positioned atop a hill near the town's outskirts, hanging served as the punishment for common offenders. This method involved a prolonged, painful suffocation, with the process often extending over several minutes. The remains were frequently left to decay on the gallows for extended periods, transforming into a decaying figure that acted as a foul warning. This represented the final disgrace of a criminal's fate. For the elite, a more dignified option existed: decapitation. Using a sword or axe for execution was reserved for the elite. Considered a swift, honorable end, it symbolized the condemned's noble heritage. In contrast to hanging, a slow, public torment, beheading showcased a swordsman's precision, a single, decisive strike that severed the offense from the individual. The most feared punishment targeted individuals accused of offenses beyond human law: heretics, sorcerers, and often violators of divine principles. This involved execution through flames. The condemned were secured to a post in the central plaza encircled by stacks of timber. Flames were thought to possess a purifying effect, purging the heretic spirit as they reduced their corpse to ashes, ensuring it couldn't rise again on the day of reckoning. This was a dual destruction, a terrifying display meant to showcase the church's unchallenged authority. For the gravest offense, betrayal of the monarch, the most severe penalty followed: hanging, disembowelment, and quartering. This brutal, multi-part procedure included hanging until near death, evisceration while conscious, and ending with decapitation and dismemberment. The remains would be transported to various cities within the kingdom and exhibited on the gates, serving as a grim, final warning of the cost of betrayal. Each punishment represented a calculated emblem, a final severe declaration expressed through the lexicon of death. Not every form of retribution was etched in blood and wounds. In a civilization anchored in assets, kinship, and hierarchy, the most ruinous penalties targeted an individual's income and their fundamental position in society. Such penalties, though not harming the physical form, could obliterate existence entirely. The primary non-physical penalty was monetary sanctions. This did not mirror modern traffic fines. In a time of limited currency and precarious living conditions, hefty penalties could be devastating. Penalties typically adjusted according to the victim's societal rank, a system called weregild in medieval times. Damaging a noble required immense financial resources, while harming a farmer incurred minimal expenses. A substantial debt for a free cultivator might necessitate selling his animals, equipment, and farmland, leading to long-term financial ruin for his household. A more severe consequence involved the seizure of property. In cases of grave offenses such as betrayal or specific major offenses, officials could take all possessions, residence, territories, funds, and personal belongings. This penalty extended beyond the offender, dismantling their family's stability. A condemned man's spouse and offspring might suddenly lose shelter and resources, stripped of ancestral assets and status, leaving them with no choice but to beg or toil without land. Among the most feared penalties, excluding execution, were exile and outlaw status. Being expelled from your town, region, or the whole realm meant losing your identity and the right to live. In a society lacking passports and support systems, exiles were considered non-entities. They forfeited all: residence, kin, companions, and means of sustenance. Being labeled an outcast was more dire. This rendered you entirely beyond legal protection. You possessed no legal privileges. Everyone had the legal right to pursue and eliminate you without consequence. A reward frequently existed for an outlaw's capture, making every unfamiliar person a possible pursuer. A fugitive endured a bleak, isolated life, concealed in wilderness and desolate areas, surviving through theft and deceit. For many, banishment and outlaws were not an escape. They were merely a delayed, solitary version of a death sentence. Examining the medieval penal system reveals a realm of apparent brutality. The stocks, the hot iron, the scaffold, they all signal an acceptance of anguish and communal torment foreign to today's norms. Yet labeling it purely as savage overlooks the compelling, though horrifying rationale that sustained it. Their legal framework served as a harsh yet candid reflection of their society's core convictions and fears. What insight does this reflection provide? Initially, it exposes a realm where justice was visible. In a community lacking widespread media and limited reading skills, covert punishment held no significance. The visible display was the essence. The embarrassment of the pillory, the pain of the flogging, and the certainty of the execution served as public declarations, strengthening societal structure and authority's dominance comprehensible to all, from children to elders. Second, it illustrates a realm where the physical form functioned as a written document. The offender's skin served as a medium for legal authorities to inscribe their strongest admonitions. The mark on a cheek, the absence of a limb. These were enduring, visible symbols of wrongdoing, a perpetual reminder to society about the outcomes of lawbreaking. Third, it reveals a collective-focused culture where societal needs overshadowed personal concerns. Sanctions such as public humiliation and banishment targeted not only the perpetrator but also aimed to remove harmful influences, reinstating societal balance through communal rituals and, in rare cases, rehabilitation. Your standing and status in the group held greater worth than nearly all else. Ultimately, it reveals a society deeply rooted in religious belief. The trial constituted a direct invocation of divine authority. Punishing heretics safeguarded the broader Christian framework. Offenses transcended legal boundaries, embodying moral transgressions. The entire framework aimed to re-establish a divinely structured order shattered by force. Medieval penalties stemmed from calculated discipline, not erratic cruelty. They emerged from a perspective valuing honor, collective unity, and sacred hierarchy as unquestionable truths. It was an oppressive structure, yet one with a defined aim, a distorted echo of the society that birthed it.